A Malibu dad who'd killed his wife and her young child out of greed? It sure looked that way to Stan Roden, the Santa Barbara district attorney. This is Dempsey Billy, a DA's investigator who worked on the case.
I think we had 5 or 6 or 7 criminal investigators, and then probably about 12 deputy district attorneys. And so they'd roundtable it to see if the district attorney's office should file that case.
When the facts of Fred's case were presented, there were crickets.
Nobody really wanted the case. They didn't think there was enough evidence there to accuse Fred Roehler. And then Stan Roden felt very strongly about it and took it and ran with it.
Stan Roden was the elected official, the boss, and he wanted to argue the case himself. He was determined to bring Fred Roehler to justice.
He's the one who said, I'll take it myself.
He put the full weight of his office behind the effort. Law enforcement was investigating 5 deaths with possible connections to Fred. Verna, Doug, the Navy diver who had drowned while using Fred's scuba equipment, and also Verna's first husband, Bill, and Fred's first wife, Jean. The Santa Barbara detectives, Fred Ray and Claude Tuller, had turned up a ton of dirt on Fred. For every person in Malibu who admired him, it seemed, another one thought he was a creep. He was cold, he was harsh, he was weird. He was kind, he was true. You could trust him with your life. Fred hired a high-powered defense attorney and engaged a team of private eyes. They started re-interviewing the detectives' sources, all those Malibu people who had talked to Ray and Tuller and told the tales the detectives wove into that scandalous 54-page affidavit. But when Fred's investigators fanned out over Malibu, they heard a very different story. Kathy Pullis, a Malibu mom, had talked to detectives back in March of 1981, before Fred's arrest. In the affidavit, Detective Tuller wrote that she, quote, described Fred as being strange, stormy, and rigid. He also wrote, citing Kathy, the second marriage was not as happy as Verna's first marriage with Bill. She described Bill as being gentle and Fred as not gentle. And he wrote, again supposedly based on Kathy's commentary, Doug was afraid of Fred. But 2 months later, when one of Fred's investigators went to talk to Kathy, she was appalled. The detectives had taken her words and twisted them.
I mean, I can tell right off the bat this is not quite accurate.
Okay, what don't you consider accurate?
Well, let me go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Where it said Verna had problems with her second marriage. Second marriage was not as happy as Verna's first marriage with Bill. I don't know that, and I didn't say that. This kind of elaborates on what I might have said, when I didn't really say quite like
in other words, it's worded a lot more strongly than...
Exactly. Where it talked about, described Fred as being strange, stormy, and rigid. Yes, I think his way of dealing maybe with discipline was rigid, but a lot of that is what I had heard. I did not witness him beating up his children.
Okay.
Or
disciplining them.
No. Let me go on here.
Okay.
Described as Bill as being very gentle and Fred as not gentle. I don't really know that he's not gentle.
So you did not say that?
No. That Fred was not gentle. I don't...
This is exactly what I'm here for. Just go on making comments like you are as you're going along.
And I never said that Doug was afraid of Fred, because I never witnessed that.
Fred had some detractors in Malibu. She wasn't a fan. But had that somehow been turned into a criminal complaint against the guy?
And I don't know if some of these people have an axe to grind. Human nature, wow, a great scandal. Go with it.
By the end of her conversation with the investigator, Kathy Pullis was angry.
I'm offended that, they kind of did a lot of insinuating here to make their case better or whatever. So, no, I would say that this, no, isn't.
You would not testify to what...
I would not testify.
Santa Barbara detective Fred Ray didn't respond to my interview request, and Claude Tuller has died. but they left a very long paper trail. To build their case against Fred, they had to deal with an inconvenient reality. There was just not a lot of physical evidence. So they'd gotten creative and poked around the tight-knit community of Malibu for clues. That was a gold mine. Everyone knew something, or had heard it third hand from someone else. So the detectives gathered a lot of juicy stories. That presented Fred's defense team with a challenge. This is how one of the private detectives put it to him back in the spring of 1981.
Somewhere along the lines, it's been said that there are three Fred Raylers. One is the one you think of yourself as. The other one is the one that people perceive you as. And the third one is the one that you really are.
So who was the real Fred Raylor? I'm Dana Goodyear, and this is Lost Hills. Episode 8, 3 Freds. Fred needed to prove that the Santa Barbara detectives had it all wrong. They had him all wrong. He was a good guy, and he set about trying to prove it from his jail cell in Santa Barbara. Top of mind for Fred? Beating back the image of him created by detectives Ray and Tuller in the affidavit. Here he is, talking to the private eye.
When I received the copy of the affidavit, the 54-page essay,
right.
I sat down and responded to it page by page.
Mm-hmm.
After I did that, I went back and I wrote probably at least 1 to 2 tablets, legal tablets, full of just what we're going to be talking about
right.
again.
Right.
I don't know if you've had an opportunity.
They went through a list of all the people Fred knew in Malibu. But not just that. They talked about his family, Verna's family, Jean's family. According to Fred, Verna's family and Jean's parents were totally supportive of him.
There's a good dialogue and good communication, and they are as close to me really as my parents as can.
Mm-hmm.
It's a unique situation.
That's going to be a strength as far as your, to put it in a very pragmatic term.
Yeah.
These people are going to be your best character witnesses.
It was important, the investigator said, that the persona Fred presented to the jury be credible. If there was a bad Fred, he needed to know about that too.
See, we don't want to characterize you as any kind of a saint. Okay, you're a human. You've got your strengths. You've got your weaknesses. You've got the things that people know about you. And if we can get some kind of a composite, then we can present you to a jury in a way that the jury's going to say, hey, here we are.
One person who knew him well, and who Fred felt sure would vouch for him, was his psychiatrist, Dr. Paul Remus.
R-E-M-I-S. Maybe in Tarzana.
Law enforcement had run into a contradiction in Fred's persona in the stories various witnesses told about him. The man who lived for his family versus the man who would brutally kill them. If Fred was capable of the cold murders the DA suspected him of, surely Dr. Remus would have seen the signs. He'd know if Fred was faking. Right? Fred's private investigator went to interview Dr. Remus, the psychiatrist Fred had consulted after Jean died and again after Verna died. The investigator wanted to know how Fred had presented himself in therapy if his grief had seemed authentic. Here's Dr. Remus.
The first time that I saw Fred, and he talked about the fact that his first wife had died, and it was an accidental drowning, I think he brought me the pathology report. He talked about looking into how it happened, what was the cause of it. He was concerned and upset about it, but he didn't cry.
Dr. Remus said he wasn't surprised by Fred's lack of emotion. To him, it didn't indicate that Fred had killed Jean, just that he didn't really like her.
This was totally in keeping with his feeling about Jean, that they really weren't getting along too well. And he is by nature, he's a fellow who holds his feelings in, tries to intellectualize a lot, uses words and hard data and facts, and doesn't give in to his feelings very easily at all. So that the fact that he didn't cry, but he looked upset, was acceptable to me. I didn't have any question. Second time.
But when Verna died, Fred's behavior was markedly different.
This time when I saw him with Verna, the very first thing he said, first sentence he said was, "My wife is dead." And he looked at me and he broke into tears straight away.
To Remus, this was real sorrow, an unfakeable, authentic emotion.
That was very significant to me. Because this is a guy who tries to use intellectual defenses all the time. And here I don't believe he could have faked it. I didn't have that feeling that there was a manipulation of my feelings at all. The actions spoke for themselves. So he was moved to the point of reacting. The nature of the relationship with Verna was entirely different than his relationship with Jean. It changed his life. And I think that that's enormously significant. You see, here we have a guy.
Verna, Dr. Remus said, pushed Fred in a good way.
She demanded that he experience life. And his connection to her was entirely different than his connection to Jean. To get on with Verna, to be in love with Verna, meant you had to get into yourself. You had to feel yourself. She meditated. She was on nutrition therapy. She started jogging. She lived. And she was his life. In fact, just showed him the way that life could be. Now, I don't know, this is not to make comments as to, well, he would want to get rid of Jean. I'm not saying that. I'm saying Verna meant to him something that money couldn't buy.
His phrasing is arresting. Verna meant something money couldn't buy.
Verna and he fit together, both of them having lost a partner and both of them having children. And she essentially knowing how to take children a lot better than he did. It was a functional thing for them both.
He thought Verna had also helped Fred process Jean's death. Things between Fred and Jean were so acrimonious at the end. Jean's death was especially hard for Fred, Remus said, because deep down he'd kind of wanted her to go away.
His worst fear, which is to have your thought played out in action. You can hate somebody, but if you find them dead, it's your worst fear. You wouldn't want that to happen. And so he was blown away.
That's where Verna came in.
She was a religious person, okay, and he wasn't, and she, grounded him. She really gave him some kind of a basis for understanding, an emotional basis, I'd say. He understands things very well, intellectually.
Oh, I know, he's a very bright fellow.
That's right, but emotionally, it's difficult for him to sometimes get into his feelings. He's not really had a lot of experience in communicating feeling to other people about how he feels inside.
Difficult for him to express his emotions and his feelings?
I'd go farther than that. I'd say that often people like Fred can express themselves pretty well, but deep inside they know they're holding out. They're not really wide open. Vulnerable, that's the word. Difficult to be vulnerable. He was vulnerable when he came into the office the second time.
Medical professionals who saw Fred right after the drownings told the detectives about odd behavior they'd observed. Fred's vital signs were normal, and he had no obvious injuries, but he was acting really out of it, seemingly drifting in and out of consciousness and refusing to answer questions. They'd suggested to the detectives Fred might have been faking. The investigator wanted to know if Fred knew enough about psychology, about what was expected of him, to be able to act shocked and horrified when Verna and Doug died.
The answer is yes, but balance it against other things. And the odds are 0.01% that he's psyched out the whole thing, figured out, how to react, and there's nothing in his past that suggests that there's just that kind of psychopathology. That makes good TV story, where the criminal is so clever that he fools everybody. I don't believe he can do that in real life.
Remus said Fred's love for Verna was genuine, and so was his investment in his children. He didn't think the family man persona was an act, and he definitely didn't think Fred was smart enough to Jedi mind trick him. But mostly, he approached the problem practically. Besides loving Verna, Fred needed her. So why would he kill her? Law enforcement was theorizing that Fred needed money more than he needed Verna, that he was driven to kill in order to collect insurance money. Looking at his finances, it's hard to see a different source of income. He needed a change of fortune if he was going to keep living the dream in Malibu. But law enforcement didn't necessarily understand the real estate market in coastal Southern California. Here's Fred talking to one of the private investigators he hired, explaining how he got into the housing game. He started with a place in the Silver Strand neighborhood in Oxnard.
We paid some enormous amount of money, like $18,000 for this house in Oxnard over on the Silver Strand.
In 1972.
Yeah. And we still have it this day.
You still own the house over there?
Yeah. It's worth a little more now.
Oh, yeah.
It was appraised at 105 or something like that.
Fred's friend Mike Killeen told that same investigator that Fred's instincts for real estate were the key to his financial solvency.
Oh, I can tell you a story. It's real easy. Because you remember what happened between like 70 and 76 and 77. Things went crazy.
It was a story that hinged on the massive inflation of home values in the region.
When Fred and Jean moved back from Berkeley, they purchased a house on Cowpine. My recollection is that they paid somewhere in the $50,000 to $60,000 range for that house. I don't know how creative he was in financing, but again, the guy doesn't have to be wealthy to put that together. And he put it together. He had income property in Oxnard. He had income property in Malibu. And Verna had some income property in Malibu. And with that going on, that's how I suppose he would pay his mortgage. And as far as I knew, he probably had some resources to draw from, a little bit of savings.
Was Fred all consumed with making the almighty dollar?
Oh, God, no. The man has the soul of a poet, not of a raving business lunatic who thinks that the dollar is the most important thing. But he's not a stupid man. He certainly realized the value of his prudent investments early on.
Mike's point? Fred might look overextended to the investigators, but all these properties were working for him, making him money, and home values were surging. For months, Fred sat in a jail cell in Santa Barbara. He made a lot of notes, long lists of things for his defense team to do, impassioned rebuttals of the witness statements against him, lists of reasons why the accusations were so boneheaded in the first place. Law enforcement was overreaching, out of control. Quote, bad news, coaching investigation targets and putting words in their mouth, a no-no, unquote. One list he made was titled, Why Not at Santa Cruz Island, January 2nd, 1981. There were 38 numbered reasons why not. Number 6, could have waited till we were in Mexico and had them done in by bandits. Number 12, would have picked a boat that sank. Number 14, would have beat them up on rocks to mask anything I would have done. Number 15, could have cut them and had sharks in 10 minutes. Number 16, could have had them done in on a secluded part of Malibu Beach. Could have been jumped by dopers or... Number 17, could have had them kidnapped. Number 18, why would I want to ruin a dream boat trip? Could have waited till everyone wanted to go home, or I was ready to go home. Fred wasn't the only one strategizing. He had a robust defense team, led by a high-powered defense attorney. A few of his friends from Malibu and one of his brothers were also helping. And so was Fred's friend Bill Fairfield, the lawyer who was part of all those hot tub parties back in the Gene era, who'd advised him and Verna on estate planning and set up the trust. Here they are, troubleshooting Fred's defense, addressing the things that made him seem guilty. The awkward facts they were going to have to work around.
And our purpose in being congregated here this morning is to discuss some ideas and hopefully bring out some suggestions that may be of benefit to Fred's defense in connection with the upcoming trial.
Awkward fact number 1. Verna and Doug could swim.
One of the things that certainly has come to my mind is, and that has certainly become a major issue, is the swimming ability of both Doug and Verna. Have any of you experienced or visualized Doug in any type of a panic situation before?
He was a hyper kid, wasn't he?
High strung.
Perpetual motion.
Which would indicate to me, whether it ties or not, I don't know, but would indicate to me that under a situation of panic, he would tend to react a little bit more than the average.
Yeah, but a lot of kids would. I mean, my kid 2 days ago got turned over by a wave and was in a terrible shape. You know, this was 3 feet from me, was in a panic. Got, you know, so
But if your kid is just the average kid in terms of energy, perpetual motion of Doug, maybe Doug would react even,
yes,
crash about even a bit more, which again is why I wonder about that. I mean, you can come up with 10, 12, 20 ways perhaps that Doug could have been hit in the head. The oar, the camera action, Fred falling over, as they're all falling out of the boat, Verna grabbing something, and maybe that something was Doug, and pushed Doug down into the boat. Who knows?
Awkward fact number 2. Fred could really swim.
you know, to the Machiavellian mind, here is a man who is more expert in the water than, 99% of the population. So he knows exactly. I mean, he is in his element when he's in the water. Exactly. So therefore, he knows what to do to, if he wanted, in calculating fashion, right, to do that. He knows what to do. And this could rebound badly against him as a possibility.
It could be used in argument to show that's why Fred survived. He was in the water a long damn time. Okay, and he swam those people a long ways, and that's, I couldn't have done it. I think I'd have bought it long before. He was in the water up to at least an hour, as far as we can tell, maybe an hour and a half. So I think you can use it to cut both ways, but it's a concern.
Let me.
Awkward fact number 3. Lady the dog.
He was able to save the dog, wasn't he?
The dog was able to save himself.
Oh, the dog. Okay, well, okay. But the rock wall is exactly that, a sheer rock wall. And so...
50 foot or something?
Well,
at least.
And so the idea, I don't know, maybe you... as I say, physically, the idea of shoving somebody out is difficult.
Just lost one of them.
Okay, so no one could really explain how Lady got up there. Awkward fact number 4. Fred, his whole manner, it was wooden.
Fred comes over on that tape to the officers is very calculating and deliberate with respect to his story.
canned speech type?
Well, for the most part, like in the first hour and a half of the interrogation, he rarely breaks down at all. Except when he mentions Verna's name or he mentions Doug's name, he does appear a little bit choked up. It's fleeting. It's just there for a moment, and then he's back to normal. Fred's a very reserved individual. He's very calculating by nature, and he also knew what those guys meant.
In pretrial hearings, they said, Fred was coming off as stiff, aloof.
He wanted him to smile a little bit more, look a little bit more relaxed when he's sitting there at the bench.
And
at a bail hearing where he was denied release, Fred had shown no emotion.
One of those. Just if he puts his hands up to his hand and shakes his head.
Could they be saying that?
Yeah.
You know, his expressions changing not at all. I wanted him to be a little bit pissed off.
Now, when you get a jury up there and Fred gets on the stand to testify in his own defense, indeed, if he comes across with some of what you've just said, almost cool, calculating, cool as a cucumber, matter of fact, except for, emotional chokes, that, the jury could say, Jesus, this guy is so bloody calculating that it's conceivable.
Precisely.
Except that if, on the other hand...
They were hesitant, though, to give Fred too much direction, especially if the prosecution was going to put on a case saying he was a phony and a fake.
No. Well, then that's the worst thing you could do, to say, give us a movie of the week performance.
Well, maybe he takes Valium for that, but the thing is, he can react to. He can react without being contrived.
In this tape, he was stifling. He was trying to push it down, so I think to enhance his communication with the officers. But I think what needs to be done is to encourage Fred to allow it to well up, let it come out. Get a little bit more emotional inside when you feel it. Let that come out. Display it.
Anytime you want him to break down, you just march those 3 kids in the back of the courtroom, and he will be in tears.
In essence, what your comments are that you feel that Fred's state of mind is so bad because of all of the tragedies that's happened in his life that he's basically just kind of prepared himself.
That's it. It's not a guy that said, "Oh, geez, I hope I get away with this." It's a guy that's saying,
"What next?
What next?"
Awkward fact number 5. The elephant in the room. Jean, Fred's first wife, who also drowned under murky circumstances.
Is Jean going to be admissible?
We're working on it.
What do you think?
No,
Yes.
I don't think it is. What would you say right now, Bill? That's what you're thinking is too?
Yeah, but
How can you keep it in?
how? Well, the thing is, the judicial system does not allow evidence of prior crimes to come in just to show that there's a criminal disposition on behalf of the defendant. That he's more inclined to commit crimes than anyone else. Sometimes you get an initial common scheme, plan or design, intent, or knowledge.
This will all depend upon rulings by the judge as to whether it's going to be in or not. It's a discretionary type of thing.
The outcome of the trial might turn on whether the judge allowed the DA to talk about Jean. If the jury saw a pattern and thought that Fred was killing his wives, that would be tough for Fred to overcome.
But there's no doubt that the prosecution has to bring in the Jean death and some of the insurance history to prove their case. I mean, if they don't, their case is blown out of the water.
Well, it's severely impaired. Let's put it that way. You still have Fred's story, whether or not it's credible or not.
The outcome of the trial would depend almost entirely on Fred, the only witness to the drownings of Verna and Doug. And Fred was confident in his ability to explain the strange circumstances of their deaths. After all, he had experience. He'd done it before. He'd silenced the rumors stirring in Malibu after Jean's death. He'd even managed to persuade one of her best friends, Verna, to marry him. But this time, he'd be facing a jury, 12 strangers, and a formidable adversary, Stan Roden, the Santa Barbara DA. Coming up on the next episode of Lost Hills, Fred's trial draws a crowd.
People like stories about rich people and rich people doing bad things. This is mythology. If somebody got life insurance and killed their wife in a glamorous situation on a yacht, on a holiday weekend, wow, that's a big deal. And look, we've got this highly technical evidence about it because it's, we're such a hotshot prosecution that we can do this.
That's next in episode 9, Prejudicial Effect. Lost Tales is written and reported by me, Dana Goodyear. It's created by me and Ben Adair and produced by Western Sound and Pushkin Industries. Subscribe to Pushkin Plus and you can hear the whole season ad-free and get early access to the final 2 episodes. Find Pushkin Plus on the Lost Hills show page in Apple Podcasts or at pushkin.fm.